Everybody, welcome to Chapter 4, Section 3, Completing the Square. In this section, I am going to solve quadratic equations that are not factorable, and to do that, we are going to do something called completing the square. And you can also use the completing the square formula to not just solve quadratic equations, but to convert a quadratic equation from standard form into vertex form. It's a very similar skill. So that's what I'm going to do in this first section here, is converting a standard form equation into vertex form, and I'll do that by completing the square. So at the top of the paper, I put the completing the square formula is add b over 2 squared to both sides. So b is the number by the x. Never throw the x in there, just the number by it. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So here I have negative 12x. So this negative 12 is my b. Okay, so to start off, what you want to do is, if there's a third number, you want to move that to the other side. All right, and so we're just going to keep the f of x there, and we'll say f of x minus 18. And leave a little bit of room, and then write equals x squared minus 12x. And the reason why we left a little bit of room is I did mention the completing the square formula is add b over 2 squared, and then I don't know if I said it before, but it is to both sides, so that's why you leave a bit of room. So we are going to write plus, and then in parentheses, we'll do negative 12 over 2 squared on one side. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. All right, that's, the rules of algebra. So 12 was negative, so negative 12 over 2 squared. All right, so this is what our equation looks like right now. So now let's figure out what negative 12 over 2 squared is. Negative 12 divided by 2 would be negative 6, and negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. So I'm going to write this as f of x minus 18 plus 36 equals, and then you have x squared minus 12x plus 36. All right, so the easiest thing to do now is to combine these two. So this will say negative 18 plus 36, that's just positive 18. So f of x plus 18 equals, and now let's simplify this. If we're going to convert a standard form equation into a vertex form equation, it needs to be factorable. And it needs to be factorable in the sense that it needs to become a perfect square trinomial. That's the name of it. So that is why we apply the completing this square process or formula to this process, because it will turn this, this original trinomial, it will turn that into a perfect square trinomial. X squared minus 12x is plus 36 is a perfect square trinomial. And so this is what I mean by a perfect square trinomial. Your factors of 36 that add up to negative 12 are the same numbers, right? It's negative 6 and negative 6. You'll notice it's this number on the inside of your parentheses, the b over 2, I mean. And so negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36, and negative 6 plus negative 6 is negative 12. So I am going to write this as x minus 6 times x minus 6. And so so what I mean by it's a perfect square trinomial is if it's the same pairs, then you don't have to write it twice. You just write it once to the power of 2. So if you ever see a binomial here, like two terms in here, that's being squared, it means this. It means two separate x minus 6's multiplying by each other. So that's really what we have going on here. So I have f of x plus 18 equals x minus 6 squared. And then to finish the problem is to just minus 18 to the other side. And so I'll write my final answer right up here. And it was f of x equals, and we had x minus 6 squared, and then minus 18. And so remember, converting it to vertex form, this tells me my vertex. The h is 6 and the k is negative 18. So my vertex will be at 6 comma negative 18. So that's the benefits of converting something to vertex form. So I'll do a few more examples of this and I'll go through them a little bit quicker. I'll start off by identifying the b before I add 6 to the other side. And then now I will add 6 to the other side. You can do that at once. So f of x plus 6 equals, leave some room, equals x squared minus 2x. And so we are going to add in that b over 2 squared to both sides. And let me just fix this a little bit. Okay, so our b was negative 2, so it's negative 2 over 2 squared. And negative 2 over 2 squared. So officially that will make negative 1 squared, which makes a positive 1. So I'm going to say f of x plus 6 plus 1 equals x squared minus 2x plus 1. So make sure you're using parentheses when you're doing the b over 2 squared, because it should always be a positive number. Okay, if you're squaring a negative number in parentheses, it'll become positive. Technically, if you're squaring a number without the use of parentheses, it'll stay negative because it's like a negative 1 times, whatever number you're squaring. So if you're using the calculator, that's how it's going to interpret it. So make sure you use parentheses. And so here I'm going to write f of x plus 7 equals, and then I'm going to write this as, it's going to be x minus 1 squared. So how do I get x minus 1 squared? I can explain it a few different ways. What are the factors of 1 that add up to negative 2? 1 is 1 times 1, and if you make them both negative, then they add up to negative 2 and multiply for a positive 1. But you can think about it quicker than that. In the last example, I pointed out that the number that was in here before you squared it is the number that goes there. So this made negative 1, so I'll write x minus 1 squared. That's just kind of like the shortcut way of thinking about it. So if you want to get in the habit of doing that, that's perfectly fine. Because that's how it'll be. So yeah, just use this number that's inside the parentheses and put it there. So it'll be x plus or minus some number squared. It'll be whatever number is in this before you square it, okay? And the third way you can think about it is, since you've completed the square and you've converted this into a perfect square trinomial, you would think, what's the square root of 1? You're like, it's plus or minus 1. So do I use plus 1 or minus 1? I'm going to use minus 1 because this sign was minus in the middle. I'd use plus 1 if this sign in the middle was plus. So let me show what I'm talking about here. What's the square root of 36? It's plus or minus 6. So am I going to use plus 6 or minus 6? Well, this sign in the middle was minus, so I used minus 6. So if that sign were plus 12, x in the middle, I would have used x plus 6 in my parentheses. So whatever way you want to think about it, do that. And then, yeah, the last step we need to do here is just minus 7 over, and we will have our final answer of f of x equals x minus 1 squared minus 7. And so remember, you flip the sign on the inside, so the vertex is at positive 1, negative 7. So that's what that tells us. And so I don't want to go too long with this video, so maybe work these two out on your own. And pause the video, because when you resume it, I'll have it solved and I'll quickly go over them, okay? Okay, so on this one I had a b of -8. So I minus 18 to the other side, and I plugged in -8 over 2 squared to both sides, and that got me 16. That's -4 squared, which gets you 16. And so I changed it to plus 16 here, plus 16 there. So like I said before, this made a -4, so when I factor this, it turns into x minus 4. Or, what's the square root of 16? It's 4, plus or minus 4. Am I going to use plus 4 or minus 4? The middle sign was negative, so I'm going to use minus 4. So this turned into x minus 4 squared. -18 plus 16 is -2, plus 2 to the other side, and you get x minus 4 squared plus 2. So that would make my vertex at 4, 2. This one, the b was a positive 6. So I minus 4 to the other side, and then I added in 6 over 2 squared to both sides. And so 6 over 2 is 3. So I'm going to have a x plus 3 in my factored answer. Yeah, 3 squared would make a 9. So before that, I added a 9 to each side. And so, like I said before, since this made a 3, this was plus 3. But also you can think, what's the square root of 9? Plus or minus 3. Am I going to use plus 3 or minus 3? This middle sign was positive, or plus, so I'm going to use plus 3. So I wrote a plus 3 there. So I combined -4 and 9 to make positive 5. And then I minus 5 to the other side. So my final answer is x plus 3 squared minus 5, making my vertex at -3, -5. So with all these examples, it's important to note that these are all converted equations. So they're all exactly the same equation, just their appearance is different, okay? So if you were to graph, the appearance of the equation is different. If you were to graph this graph would look exactly the same as this graph, okay? And that's true for all these that I did. So if you use your graph to check and the graphs overlap, you know you did it right. But if they don't overlap, you made a mistake somewhere down the line. So with the remaining time, I'm going to solve some equations and by completing this square. So let's start off with x squared minus 10x plus 7 equals 0. So the process will start the same. Identify your b, and then move the c to the other side. All right, so we're going to have x squared minus 10x. You'll notice these equal 0 instead of f of x, because when you solve, you want it to equal 0, right? So I have x squared minus 10x, and then I'm going to add in the b over 2 squared, so -2, 10 over 2 squared, and then that's going to equal -7 plus, you have to add in the negative b over 2 squared to both sides, so -10 over 2 squared. And so this is going to get me x squared minus 10x, and then -10 over 2 is -5, squared would make positive 25, so plus 25 equals -7 plus 25. So convert this to factored form. What's the square root of 25? Plus or minus 5? Am I going to use plus 5 or minus 5? I'll use minus 5 because 10 is negative. Also, -10 over 2, that made a -5. So 2 ways of thinking about it there. So x minus 5 squared equals -7 plus 25 is 18. So with the last batch of examples, I just minus the 18 over and I had my equation. But we're trying to solve this. So this is going to be a lot like that square root method, because now we're going to take the square root. We're going to have x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 18. Now, does 18 simplify? Yes, it does. So I'm going to write the square root of 18 right here. And 18, what are your factors of 18? 18 and 1 and 9 and 2. Hey, 9 has a square root. So instead of saying the square root of 18, the square root of 9 is plus or minus 3. And then I'll write square root of 2. So I'm going to erase this square root of 18. And then I'm going to write 3 square root 2. All right? And then I'm going to add 5 over, and I'll have my 2 answers. So you'll want to put the regular number up front, so 5, and then you want the plus or minus thing to come after. So my two answers are 5 plus a 3 square root 2 and 5 minus 3 square root 2. And you can get those two answers if asked for, but other than that, you have solved this equation. So what do you do if the number in front of x squared is bigger than 1, the a, if a is not 1? Well, you need to divide that out. So most of the time, your teachers will give you numbers where everything divides evenly, and so that's nice. But if it doesn't, you just keep everything in a fraction form. The process stays the same. But I believe these all divide by 4. So if you have a number in front, just divide it out. So this is x squared plus 8x, and then negative 68 divided by 4 is negative 17. And so we don't have to add or subtract a third number to the other side like I did on the first step over here. It's already on the other side, see? So I have minus 17. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 8 for my b, and I'm going to do x squared plus 8x plus 8 over 2 squared equals negative 17 plus 8 over 2 squared. All right? So this is me just labeling this as a b. I'm not raising it to the power of b. So here, b. Okay. X squared plus 8x plus 8 over 2 squared. 8 over 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So this turns into x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals, and then you have negative 17 plus 16. And so you have x plus 4 squared. Again, how do I arrive at x plus 4 squared? The square root of 16 is 4 or negative 4. I used positive 4 because it was a plus 8. Also, 8 over 2 is a positive 4, so I'll make plus 4. And then negative 17 plus 16 is negative 1. So square root both sides. You get x plus 4 equals, and then remember the square root of negative 1 by definition is I. But anytime you do square root, say plus or minus. And then you are going to minus 4 to the other side. Whoops. And then you have your final answer. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus I. And that's the answer for this. So if you feel like you're getting the hang of it, do these two examples yourself. I'm going to do these off camera and then quickly explain them in the video. So for this one, I had a b of 10 and positive 10. So I did positive 10 over 2 squared. I added that to both sides. I do not know why I wrote a negative 10 there. So there, positive 10 over 2 squared. That makes positive 25, similar to the last one, except it was a plus 10x in the middle. So this is going to be a plus 5, because square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. I use plus 5 because it's a plus in the middle. Also 10 over 2 is positive 5. And then negative 6 plus 25 is positive 19. So square root both sides. 19 is actually a prime number, so it cannot simplify. So I just wrote plus or minus square root of 19. I minus the 5 over, and I got my final answer. So for this one, you had a number in front of x squared. First step, divide it all out. So everything divided by negative 3, and so that changed all the signs to positive. So I got x squared plus 6x plus 2. So I minus the 2 over, and then I started to complete the square. I took 6 over 2, b over 2, and squared it. 6 over 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9, so plus 9 plus 9. And then this factored into x plus 3 squared because this was a positive 3, so this would say x plus 3. Also, the square root of 9 is plus or minus 3, and I used plus 3 because this was a plus 6x. So negative 2 plus 9 is 7, square root both sides. 7 is another prime number, so it just stays plus or minus the square root of 7, minus 3 over, and you get x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 7. So that's it for the video. Thank you for watching. Bye.